keep doing daily videos on YouTube, I need to raise my Patreon and Subscribe Star income to a grand total of $200 a month. So if you're so inclined, help a chap out. Zang.
Everything we own is in that house!
How often have you driven by a fire and thought, how can this benefit me?
Hello, lovelies. A lot of people are taking the coronavirus and the fallout from the coronavirus as some kind of automatic, explicit support for whatever views they happen to be holding in the first place. And I'm no different. I have my own biases, but I think I'm aware of them more.
This is awful!
That's what I said.
But a lot of people are using this crisis to try and push or reinforce certain agendas. Such as, I'm sure you've seen the headlines saying that women are being disproportionately affected by the coronavirus in terms of income and so on. But it's men that are dying more, which would seem to be the ultimate impact. Again, this is not what about the men's. It's that everyone is being affected in horrible ways and in different ways, but by fixating on one, by defaulting to the same old fault lines in our societies, you're not making it better. You're not really helping people who need it. You're just trying to disingenuously manipulate and use events to forward your pre-existing biases and prejudices. And I think that's a problem. I don't particularly want to get into the gender one this time, but the racial one is of particular note, and I think it's also of particular note with regard to the United States, which has a very long history of confusing race issues, identitarian issues, with issues of poverty, of wealth and class. For all that the US doesn't have a formal class system exactly, it does in effect have one. And of course the Venn diagram intersects quite a lot between poverty and racial minority. That's the same everywhere for a variety of reasons. A lot of cases it's because racial minorities, religious minorities, ethnic minorities, whatever kind of minority you want to talk about, they're often more precarious for one reason or another. They might be immigrants, so they've come over with very little to set up in a new country, so they're relatively poor. Their legal status might be in question or might be difficult, so they don't have the capability to access care and support necessarily in the way that they would like to or that they should be able to. People in sexual minorities, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, are more likely to be homeless because they're more likely to have parents that don't understand or whatever else, and so they're more likely to end up on the street. In the US, you have a black population, an African American population, that has been unable to break free of the inertia of their historical inequality. And that's because, for all its pretensions otherwise, the United States is not a particularly socially mobile country. If you're born poor, odds are you're going to stay poor. If you're born rich, odds are you're going to stay rich. There are always exceptions, and these get played up, but this idea of the American dream, that anybody can make it, is less true in America than it is in a lot of other less blatantly capitalistic countries, shall we say.
Many men, of course, became extremely rich, but this was perfectly natural and nothing to be ashamed of, because no one was really poor, at least no one worth speaking of.
You're more likely to rise from your birth class in Scandinavia than you are in the United States, but it's the States that has this myth, this legend of social mobility that just doesn't, unfortunately, match up to reality, and that's just the way it is, I'm afraid.
No, please. put down the jawbone.
And that's a big part, I think, of the reason why the African American community, whether native or immigrant, hasn't really been able to break free of the ghetto, of the plantation, because the opportunity is scarce, and there's very few people that make it out of that situation, and it's not necessarily clear to anybody how they managed it.
How'd you get up there? Wasn't easy!
You have to have a rare talent for sport or music or academics or whatever else to break free, and that's just not available to a lot of people, or doesn't feel like it's available to a lot of people. And this is why the US gets its class and wealth and race issues confused and intertwined, because they are to an extent. But the danger is that when you fixate upon racial issues or gender issues or sexuality issues, yeah, all of those sorts of things, right? When you do that, you're missing the wood for the trees. There's an underlying economic inequality, and if you address that for everybody, then if there is a bias, if there is a problem, then you necessarily end up solving that or helping to solve that for that group that's disproportionately affected, but without leaving other people behind. If you regard poverty as a uniquely black problem, you're going to leave behind all the Asians and Mexicans and white people who are poor.
Follow the leader. 1, 2, 3. We may be trapped.
Now, with the coronavirus, it's not the black community that is being more affected. It's the poor community that's being more affected. It's the people who are working in low-paid, precarious, unsupported, but nonetheless essential work. Deliveries, taxi drivers, warehouse staff, shipping staff, all of those kinds of people tend to be clustered in low-income areas, low-income populations, regardless of their colour or anything else. So it's a huge mistake, and it's a source of division when you should be bringing people together to say, oh my god, the black community is being disproportionately affected. Well, yeah, because they're disproportionately poor, but you don't solve that by diving headfirst into racial identitarian issues, because if you do that, then you're leaving the poor white people to die. And I bet if you compare based on wealth and class, the rates of infection, the rates of deaths and so on from coronavirus, you'll find that the difference between the poor black population and the poor white population virtually disappears. Maybe not all of it. There are a few genuinely prejudiced people out there in the world, and they do have a disproportionate effect. But overall, I would suspect that it would all but disappear. This is an opportunity to leave that identitarian horseshit behind and focus on the things that genuinely matter, the things that can genuinely create change. But so long as we're focused on what divides us and differentiates us, without really having anything meaningful to it, without having any meat on its bones, then other things will just continue as usual. This should prompt positive change, but if you're grifting, if you're grasping, if you're trying to make it about race or gender, the real problem is never going to get addressed.
Isn't that rather unethical behaviour?
Oh, is it? I'm afraid I'm a bit out of touch.
Zang. At the end of World War II, the Axis and the Allies went to war with A-bombs until nobody was left to fight. In this atomic wasteland, a new breed of rockabilly hero arises. From the gleaming domes of Science City Zero to the sleazy roller derbies of Vegas and the sky fortress of the Fourth Reich, there's a new world for the taking. 45, Psychobilly Retropocalypse. Available at lulu.com and RPG Now.